The Grand Master of Demonic Cultivation, written by Mo Xiang Tong Xiu. An unofficial reading by Emm Wilde. Book 1. Chapter 2. The Intractable. Wei Wuxian had only just opened his eyes when someone kicked him. A voice thundered in his ear. "Playing dead?" He almost coughed up blood from the kick. His head hit the ground, and with his face turned up, he thought hazily, "You've got some nerve daring to kick me, the patriarch." Wei Wuxian had already lost count of the number of years it had been since he last heard a living person speak, never mind such awful caterwauling. He was dizzy, and the cracked voice of a young man was rattling between his ears. "Think for a moment whose land you're living on, whose rice you're eating, and whose money you're spending. So what if I take a few things of yours? They should be mine anyways." Soon after, there was a clamoring noise of chests and cabinets alike being ransacked. It was a good moment before Wei Wuxian's eyes could focus. A dim ceiling came into view, as did an unfortunate-looking face with a greedy glare. That face was spraying spittle all over him. "And you dare tattle on me? You think I'm actually afraid of you tattling? Do you actually think anyone in this house is going to take your side?" Two large men who looked like servants came over. "Young master, everything's smashed." "So fast?" the quacking youth questioned. "There wasn't much stuff in this broken shack anyways," the servant replied. The quacking youth was extremely pleased. He turned to Wei Wuxian, pointing so hard at the man that he was practically jabbing his finger up his nose and into his brain. "Go and tell on me, I dare you. Who are you playing dead for? As if anyone would actually give a crap about all this junk and waste paper. I've smashed everything. Let's see what else you've got to go tattle on me with. Think you were all that just because you went to a cultivation sect for a few years? Well, didn't you get kicked out like a stray dog anyways?" Presently half dead, Wei Wuxian thought to himself, "It's not pretend. I've actually been dead for many years." Who was this? Where was this? When had he ever done something like forcibly possess the body of another? After having kicked the man, ransacked the house, and spent all his temper, the quacking youth strutted out the door along with his two servants, slamming the door behind him. He ordered in a loud voice, "Keep proper watch. Don't let him come out and embarrass people." The servants outside the door all heeded. Once the man was gone, silence settled both inside and out of the house. Wei Wuxian wanted to sit up, but his limbs would not obey him, so he lay back down and flipped over. His head continued to spin as he looked at his strange surroundings and the mess on the floor. Next to him was a copper mirror that had been tossed on the ground, and Wei Wuxian snatched it up. A dreadful pale face appeared in the mirror. Two large blots of red were smeared unevenly on each cheek. If he were to stick out a long and vividly red tongue, then he would have been the very picture of a hanged ghost. Wei Wuxian tossed the mirror aside, a little disgusted. He wiped his face and found that his hand was smeared with white powder. Fortunately, it wasn't that his body had been born strange, but rather the penchant of the previous owner. A full-grown man with a face heavily caked in makeup and sloppily applied at that. This shocked some energy back into Wei Wuxian, who had finally been able to sit up. Only then did he notice the circle of the spell array around him. The array was scarlet and crooked, seemingly hand-drawn using blood as the medium. It was still damp, emitting a metallic stench. There were warped and crazed spells drawn within the array that had been somewhat smudged by his body, but the remaining shapes and characters were gruesome in their evil intent. Wei Wuxian had been called titles such as the Supreme Evil Lord, the Grand Master of Demonic Cultivation, and whatnot for years, so naturally he was very familiar with obviously devious arrays such as these. It wasn't that he had robbed anyone of their body. He had been offered one. The nature of this sacrificial ritual was a type of curse. The caster had to harm themselves with a weapon, making cuts on their body and using their own blood to draw the array and write the spells within. They would then sit in the center of the circle and give up their mortal body to evil spirits, using the annihilation of their soul as a price to summon a nefarious, malicious ghost. This was all done in order to request a fulfillment of a wish. Thus, it was the opposite of a possession. While both were forbidden magics of ill repute, the difference between the former and the latter was that the former was much less popular than the latter. After all, few wishes were so strongly desired as to make someone willing to sacrifice everything they had. This was why the technique had been nearly lost after centuries of disuse. The examples recorded in ancient books had only a handful of cases that had been backed by reliable evidence, and every single one of them had been for revenge. Every malicious ghost summoned by the ritual had fulfilled the caster's wish perfectly, in cruel and bloody ways. Wei Wuxian refused to accept this. Since when was he categorized as a nefarious, malicious ghost? While he had had a fairly poor reputation and died an extremely tragic death, he didn't haunt the living, for one, and he'd never sought vengeance, for two. He could swear there was not a single wandering ghost in this world who was more decent and honest than he. But the tough thing was, the sacrificial ritual followed the will of the caster first and foremost, so it didn't matter how much he objected. He was already inside this body, which was a silent acknowledgement that both parties had formed a contract. He had to fulfill the wish of the caster, or the curse would rebound, destroying the possessor's primordial spirit and extinguishing it forever. Wei Wuxian yanked his sash loose and raised his arms to inspect them. Sure enough, both of his wrists were splashed with a sharp tool, leaving them covered in crisscrossing lacerations. The bleeding had already stopped, but Wei Wuxian knew that these were no ordinary injuries. If he didn't fulfill the caster's wish, then these wounds would be unable to heal, and they would worsen the longer this dragged on. If the deadline for fulfillment was missed, then he who accepted this vessel would be ripped apart in both body and soul alike. He triple-checked that there was no mistake and cried, "This is ridiculous!" many times before finally raising to his feet with difficulty, supporting himself against the wall. This house certainly was big, but it was empty and shabby. The bedding was emitting a sour stench. Who knew how many days had gone by since it was last changed? There was a bamboo basket of trash in the corner that had been kicked over earlier, and both trash and waste paper were strewn about the floor. Wei Wuxian noticed what seemed to be ink marks on the crumpled papers, so he picked one up, unpassing. He opened it to take a look, and sure enough, it was covered in words. He quickly went around to collect all the balls of paper. These were probably written by the owner of this body to vent his frustrations. Some of the sentences were incoherent and disordered, but the anxiety and nervousness were abundantly clear. Wei Wuxian patiently examined each sheet, and the more he looked, the more he felt something was amiss. Through some guesswork, he figured out a few things. First, the owner of this body was named Mo Xiang Tong, and this place was called the Mo Estate. Mo Xiang Tong's grandfather, on his mother's side, was from a rich family in this area. The family wasn't large, and the man was not fated for a son. After years of trying, he still only had 2 daughters. The name of the second daughter wasn't mentioned, but either way, the eldest daughter was born of the lawful wife. Thus, they were looking for a husband to marry into their family name. Although the second daughter was exceptional in appearance, she was born of a servant, which was why the Mo family had originally planned to marry her out without giving much thought to the groom. Who would have thought that she would be fated for a fortuitous encounter? When she was 16, the head of a prominent clan was passing by and fell in love with her at first sight. The two made the Mo manor the site of their rendezvous, and a year later, the second daughter gave birth to a son. This was Mo Xiang Tong. The inhabitants of the Mo estate would normally have held such an event in contempt, but people at the time worshipped cultivators. In the eyes of the mundane folk, cultivation clans that pursued immortality were loved by the heavens, mysterious and noble. Furthermore, that prominent clan leader would financially support this new outer family branch of his every so often. So naturally, these circumstances were special. Not only did the Mo family consider this an honor, but others were extremely envious too. However, the good days did not last. That wandering clan leader was only hungry for novel, fresh meat, and he was over it after 2 years, coming to visit less and less frequently. After Mo Xiang turned 4, the man never appeared again. In those passing years, the Mo estate's opinion changed again. The contempt and mockery returned, now with added disdain and pity. Second Lady Mo refused to accept this, believing firmly that the prominent clan leader would not turn a blind eye to his own son. And sure enough, when Mo Xiang turned 14, that clan leader sent over a grand party to officially take him back. Second Lady Mo's head was held high again. Although she could not go with them, this event swept away all the grievances she had. Feeling proud and elevated, she proclaimed proudly to everyone she saw that her son would definitely become a leader of cultivation sects in the future, rise to the top and bring glory to the ancestors. Thus, the people of the Mo estate changed their opinion for a third time. However, Mo Xiang was driven out before he managed to cultivate a claim and succeed his father, and driven out in the most shameful way. Mo Xiang was a cut-sleeve, a male homosexual, and he was so audacious as to harass his fellow peers. With this scandal exposed, and the fact that he possessed only average talent and no real achievements in cultivation, the sect had no real reason to keep him. Adding frost to snow, something had upset Mo Xiang. When he returned home, it was as a madman. His mental state had been upended, as if he had been scared silly. Having read to this point, Wei Wuxian's brow twitched a couple times. The cut-sleeve matter aside, the man was a lunatic too. No wonder he was smeared with enough makeup and powder on his face to look like a hanged ghost. No wonder no one thought it strange that there was such a large, bloody spell array on the ground. Mo Xiang could probably smear blood all over this house, from the floor tiles up the walls and to the ceiling, and no one would think it weird, because everyone knew he was crazy. After Mo Xiang returned to his old home, he was bombarded with ridicule. This time, it seemed, the situation was unsalvageable. Unable to take this blow, Second Lady Mo was choked to death by her own unappeasable outrage. At this time, Mo Xiang's grandfather had passed away, and the one managing the household was the First Lady Mo. This Madame Mo had never been able to stand her little sister, and she scorned that her sister had a little bastard. She had a single son herself by the name of Mo Xiang, the one who had just ransacked Mo Xiang's house. When Mo Xiang first left with such impressive fanfare, First Lady Mo had felt that they now possessed something of a family tie to that prominent cultivation sect, and had hoped the cultivator's envoy would also bring Mo Xiang along with them too. Of course, she had been rejected, or rather, ignored. Duh, this wasn't like selling cabbages at the market, buy one, get one free. Who knew where this family got its confidence? But they all possessed of the bizarre idea. They firmly believed that Mo Xiang had potential, that he had talent, and that if he were the one who had gone to the cultivators, then he would have been recognized for his worth for sure, unlike his failure of a cousin. Although Mo Xiang had been young when Mo Xiang left, he had been repeatedly indoctrinated to believe this nonsense without a single doubt. Thus, he caught Mo Xiang every couple days to humiliate him, cursing him for having robbed him of his path to cultivation. Yet he remained enamored with the talismans, the pills, and the little spiritual devices that had been brought back from the cultivation sect, and would take them all for himself, breaking them as he willed. While Mo Xiang was often in the throes of madness, he knew when he was being humiliated.
He tried his best to endure it, time after time, but Mo Xiang's behavior only worsened, practically emptying the entire house. At last, Mo Xiang had had enough. He finally stammered a complaint to his uncle and aunt, which was why Mo Xiang had come knocking today, looking for trouble. The words on the paper were tiny and cramped. Wei Wuxian's eyes were sore from reading all this, and he thought to himself, what kind of life was he fucking living? No wonder Mo Xiang had preferred to end it, offering his body to summon a malicious ghost to avenge himself. After his eyeballs started feeling better, it became his head's turn to ache. Technically, the caster of the array had to mentally recite their wish. As the evil spirit summoned, Wei Wuxian should have been able to hear it and all the details of his request. However, this forbidden magic had probably been secretly copied off a book with missing pages. It was incomplete, and Mo Xiang had missed that step. Although Wei Wuxian could guess that he most likely sought vengeance against the Mo family, how exactly did he want it done? To what extent? Take back what was taken? Beat up the family? Or wipe them out entirely? It was most likely wipe out the family entirely, eh? After all, anyone who had been in the cultivation world would know the words most associated with Wei Wuxian, treacherous and mad. Was there anyone who better fit the description of fiendish? Since the man had dared to summon him by name, his wish was definitely not something easily granted. Wei Wuxian said hopelessly, "But you've got the wrong guy." At first, he wanted to wash his face and gaze with reverence upon the dead countenance that had once belonged to this former owner. However, there was no water inside this house, not even drinking water. What's more, Wei Wuxian figured the only container around was for lavatory purposes and not for washing up. He tried to push the door, but it was barred from the outside, probably to prevent him from running amok. There was not a single thing that could allow him the slightest bit of joy in being reincarnated. He might as well meditate for a while and get used to the new body. An entire day passed this way. When he opened his eyes once more, there was sunlight seeping into the house through the cracks of the window. Although he could get up and walk, his head was still spinning, and it didn't appear to be getting any better. Wei Wuxian was puzzled. This Mo Xiang's cultivation spirit has been so minuscule it might as well be completely overlooked, but there's no reason why I can't manage his body. Why is it being so difficult to use? It wasn't until a strange noise sounded from his stomach that he realized that it had nothing to do with spiritual power. It was simply that this body, not trained for fasting, was hungry. If he delayed seeking food any longer, he might just become the first malicious ghost in history to die of hunger immediately after being summoned. Wei Wuxian took a deep breath and raised his foot. But just as he was about to kick the door open, there was suddenly the sound of footfalls on the other side, drawing near. Someone gave the door a kick, which was followed by an annoying call. "Mealtime!" While those were the words, it didn't appear the door was going to open at all. Wei Wuxian looked down just in time to see a small bowl be heavily pushed down below the small slat of the bottom of the door. The servant outside then added, "Hurry up! What's the hold-up? Put the bowl out when you're done." The slat was small, like a dog flap, not large enough to allow a person to go through, but the bowl could pass through. There were 2 dishes and 1 bowl of rice that looked awfully disgusting. Wei Wuxian bitterly stirred the chopsticks that were stabbed into the rice. The Yiling patriarch had returned to life, only to be kicked down and yelled at. The first meal to welcome him back was cold leftovers. Who would believe him if he told them? What had happened to his bloody reign, his absolute massacres, his unadulterated annihilation of the sects? Truly, out of the mountains a tiger can be bullied by a dog. In shallow waters a dragon can be mocked by a shrimp, and a plucked phoenix is lower than a chicken. Stripped of their privileges, the strong will be belittled by the weak. Just then, a voice of the servant outside the door was heard once more, but this time it was a laugh that sounded as if it came from a completely different person. Ah, Ding, come over here. A delicate and frail feminine voice answered from a distance. Tong, did you come to deliver food to that person in there again? Tong clicked his tongue. Why else would I be in this miserable courtyard? Ding's voice was in the door, much closer now. You only have to deliver food once a day, and no one scolds you even if you slack off every now and then. So why are you frowning at being so free? Look at me, so busy with errands that I can't even go out to play. Tong complained. It's not like delivering meals is the only thing I do. And you still dare to go outside right now? There are so many walking corpses roaming around that every household has their doors firmly shut. Wei Wuxian was crouched down by the door, pushing around the contents of the bowl in his hands with 2 chopsticks of different lengths, listening as he ate. Seemed like things were not all peaceful here at Momo Estate. Walking corpses, as per their name, were the walking dead, reanimated corpses that were low-level and commonplace. Their eyes were usually glazed, and their movements were sluggish. They were fairly harmless. Nonetheless, that was enough to terrify average folks, and their putrid smell alone was enough to make one fill a pot with puke. However, to Wei Wuxian, they were the easiest to manipulate and the most obedient of puppets. In fact, it even felt somewhat endearing to suddenly hear about them. Tong appeared to have winked. You have to take me along, then you go out, and I can protect you. Ding cut him off dismissively. You protect me? Please, can you actually fight those creatures off? If I can't fight them off, nobody can, Tong grumbled. Ding laughed. How do you know if other people can fight them off? Let me tell you, delegates from a cultivation sect have already arrived at our Mo Manor today. I hear they're from an incredibly prominent clan. The madam has received them in the main hall right this minute. Everyone in town has gathered to watch. They're all so curious. You hear that noise? They might be ordering me around again in a bit. I don't have time to play with you. Wei Wuxian listened intently. Sure enough, there was the faint sound of commotion. After a moment's contemplation, he got up and kicked the bar locking the door, which broke with a crack. The 2 servants, flirting with each other, screamed in surprise when the door was suddenly flung open. Wei Wuxian tossed the bowl and chopsticks aside as he stalked out, but the sunlight blinded him. The glare also caused a small pinching pain on his skin, so he raised his hand to his brows and closed his eyes for a moment. Tong had screamed louder than Ding a moment ago, but when he looked closer, he realized that it was that lunatic everyone could bully. His courage returned. Feeling that he must regain his dignity that he had just lost, he jumped over and waved, shooing Wei Wuxian like he would a dog. He yelled, Get out of here! Shoo! Go back in! What are you doing outside? Not even beggars or flies could have received more unsightly treatment. This was probably how these servants had treated Mo Xiang in the past, and they grew ever more impertinent when he didn't retaliate. Wei Wuxian gave Tong a light kick, sending him tumbling, and laughed. Who do you think you're trying to humiliate, huh? With that, he headed east, following the noise. Both the East Hall and the East Courtyard were crowded with people, and just as Wei Wuxian stepped into the yard, he heard a woman whose voice rose louder than the others. We have a junior in our household that has an affinity for cultivation, too. That must be Madame Mo, who had been trying to build connections with the cultivation clans again. Wei Wuxian didn't bother waiting for her to finish before he languidly squeezed between the crowd, entering the main hall. He waved enthusiastically. Over here! Over here! In the main seat of the hall sat a middle-aged woman, well-maintained and sumptuously dressed. This was Madame Mo. The one sitting below her was her husband, who had married into the family, and across from him were several white-clad youths with swords on their back. When the disheveled, unkempt weirdo suddenly emerged from the crowd, conversation came to an abrupt stop. However, Wei Wuxian seemed to take no notice of the frozen atmosphere. He said unabashedly, Who called for me just now? The one with the affinity for cultivation? Isn't that me? There was too much powder on his face, and it cracked when he smiled, flaking as it fluttered off. One of the white-clad youths snorted, almost laughing out loud, but he restrained himself when another youth who appeared to be the leader of the bunch shot him a disapproving look. Wei Wuxian snuck a glance at them and was somewhat taken aback. At first he thought an incredibly prominent clan was but the exaggerated praise of an unlearned servant. But the people here really were cultivation disciples worthy of their name. Who would have thought? Graceful sleeved and light airily sashed, these youths were exceptionally pleasing to the eye, transcendent and poised. Judging by their uniforms alone, it was obvious that they came from the Lan clan of Guzu. They were disciples with blood ties to the Lan family as well, since every single one of them had a 2-centimeter wide white ribbon patterned with rolling clouds tied around their foreheads. Elegance and righteousness was the motto of the Lan clan of Guzu, and this forehead ribbon symbolized self-restraint. The rolling clouds were the Lan family's insignia, and guest cultivators, or sect disciples outside the family, affiliated with the prominent clan, were only allowed to wear ribbons without the pattern. Wei Wuxian always cringed every time he spotted someone from the Lan family. He'd often complained under his breath in his previous life that their uniforms looked like funeral clothes, so he knew he wasn't mistaken now. It had been a long time since Madame Mo had seen that nephew of hers, and it took a while before she was able to recover from her shock. After realizing who this heavily powdered person was, she was furious, but she couldn't lose her composure, so she hissed at her husband. "Who let him out? Get him out of here!" Her husband responded with an apologetic smile and got up with a glum look, ready to seize Wei Wuxian. All of a sudden, Wei Wuxian dropped down without warning and latched firmly onto the ground, immovable no matter how much he was pulled or dragged. Not even the servants who were called in to help could do anything. If not for the outsiders who were present, they would have started to kick him already. Madame Mo's face was glowing darker and darker, and the husband was drenched in sweat as well. He yelled, "You damn lunatic! If you don't back off right now, be careful or I'll put you in your place!" Although everyone from the Mo estate knew that there was a young master in the Mo family who had gone mad, Mo Xiang had withdrawn into a gloomy house of his for many years, afraid to see anyone. Now that they saw how both his appearance and his actions resembled those of a raging monster, they started to whisper amongst themselves, excited to watch this spectacle unfold. Wei Wuxian spoke up. "I can go back if you want," he pointed at Mo Xiang, "but you have to make him return everything he stole from me first." Mo Xiang never thought this lunatic had the gall. He'd taught the boy a lesson just the other day, only to have him turn around and expose him here today. His face changed color as he exclaimed, "You're lying! Since when have I ever stolen anything of yours? Why would I need to steal any of your stuff?" Right, Wei Wuxian agreed. "You didn't steal, you snatched." Madame Mo could now tell that Mo Xiang had obviously come prepared. His mind was perfectly clear, and he was bent on humiliating them. Shocked and livid, she accused him sharply. "You fully intended to wreak havoc here today, isn't that right?" Wei Wuxian looked confused. "He stole my things, snatched it from me even. Is asking for it back still considered wreaking havoc?" Mo Xiang grew agitated, raising his leg to kick Wei Wuxian before Madame Mo could answer. However, one of the sword-carrying white-clad youths moved his fingers slightly, and Mo Xiang immediately lost his balance. The kick brushed past Wei Wuxian, missing the mark, and the boy tripped over himself. However, Wei Wuxian still stumbled and rolled as if he had been kicked. He even ripped open his robes, revealing on his chest the footprint left behind by Mo Xiang's kick the day before. The villagers of the Mo estate were enjoying the show immensely. Excitement filled the crowd. There was no way Mo Xiang could have kicked himself to create that footprint, and no matter what, he was still a member of the Mo family. What a vicious household! The boy hadn't been this crazy when he had returned home, so it was probably the family's doing. Either way, it wasn't like they were the ones being beaten, so as long as there was a show to watch, all the better. This spectacle was truly more interesting than the arrival of the cultivators. With so many eyes watching, the youth couldn't be beaten and he couldn't be kicked out. Madame Mo had no choice but to forcibly smooth the whole debacle over, with fury thick in her throat. She said impassively, "What steal? What snatch? Such ugly accusations. We're family. It's nothing but borrowing. Ah Yun is like your little brother. So what if he takes a few things of yours? As an elder brother, will you be this stingy, throwing a childish temper tantrum and embarrassing everyone over such a small matter? It's not like he won't return them to you." The white-clad youths stared at each other in dismay, and one of them almost choked on his tea. The disciples who grew up in the Lan clan of Guzu were raised to refined elegance, so they had probably never encountered such a farce, nor heard such brilliance. Today's events were probably widening their horizons. Wei Wuxian laughed maniacally in his mind and extended his hand. "Give them back, then." Of course, Mo Xiang couldn't have returned anything. All the items were long since tossed out or torn apart, and even if he could have returned them, he wouldn't have done so willingly. Red in the face, he cried out in protest. "Mom!" He eyed her with a scowl. "Are you going to let him insult me like this?" Madame Mo glowered at him, signaling him not to make the scene any worse than it already was. Unexpectedly, Wei Wuxian spoke up again. "While we're on the topic, not only should he not have stolen my stuff, he shouldn't have done so in the middle of the night. Everyone knows that I like men. Even if he has no shame, I know not to make myself suspicious." Madame Mo took in a sharp breath and yelled, "What are you spewing in front of the village folk? How shameless! Ayun is your little cousin." When it came to outrageous behavior, Wei Wuxian was an expert. In the past, he'd had to maintain some form of decorum so people couldn't accuse him of having a poor upbringing. But now he was a lunatic anyways, so what did he care for shame? He could go wild and cut loose to his heart's content. He stiffened his neck and said outright, "He knew he was my little cousin, and he still didn't observe propriety and keep his distance. So who is the one who's more shameless here? I don't care if you don't care about your reputation, but I still care about mine. I still have to find a good man." Mo Xiang roared, raising a chair to hurl in Wei Wuxian's way. Seeing that he had finally snapped, Wei Wuxian quickly scrambled up to go hide. That chair broke into pieces upon impact with the ground. The spectating crowd in and out of the East Hall were waiting with unconcealed delight to watch the Mo family be disgraced, but they all quickly dispersed once things got violent, afraid that they might be injured. Wei Wuxian ducked towards the youths of the Lan family, who were completely dumbfounded by what was unfolding, crying as he did so. You see, he's hitting me even though he stole my stuff. How heartless." Mo Xiang chased him over, ready to lunge, but the leader of the youth stopped him. Gonzi, let's talk this out." Seeing that the youth intended to protect the lunatic, Madame Mo grew apprehensive. She forced a smile. "This young man is my youngest sister's son. He is a little unstable here. Everyone in the Mo estate knows he's crazy. He's always saying strange things, so don't take him seriously. Esteemed cultivators, you mustn't—" Before she could finish, Wei Wuxian poked his head out from behind the youth. "Who said that I can't be taken seriously? From now on, if anyone steals my stuff, I'm going to chop off an arm for every time they do. Just try me." Mo Xiang was being held back by his father at first, but when he heard this, his anger flared up again. Wei Wuxian darted out the door like a fish, taunting him with a la 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 as he went. The youth quickly blocked the door right after and changed the subject, assuming a serious face to talk business. Then we will be borrowing your estate's west courtyard for tonight. Please remember exactly what I've said earlier. Lock all the doors and shut all the windows tight after dusk. Don't come out for any activities, especially not near the west courtyard." Madame Mo was shaking with rage. but it wouldn't have been courteous to push the youth aside, despite him blocking her. So she could only reply, "Yes, yes, thank you, thank you." Mo Xiang was in a state of disbelief. "Mom, are you going to let that lunatic get away with slandering me in public? Didn't you say yourself that he was only a mere—" "Shut your mouth!" Madame Mo cut him off sharply. "Can you not wait until we are back inside?" Mo Xiang had never suffered such a wrong before. Never had he been so humiliated in this way. He had especially never been scolded by his mother like this. He cried furiously, "That lunatic is dead!" After Wei Wuxian was done letting loose, he went out to the main entrance of the manor and strolled around the Mo estate to show his face, scaring innumerous passers-by and enjoying himself while he was at it. He began to understand the joy of being a madman and was even starting to be pleased by the hanged ghost makeup, not wanting to wash it off. "It's not like there's any water around anyway, so I'll let it be." He fixed his hair and glanced at his wrist. There was no indication that the cuts were fading or healing at all, which meant the trifling revenge of venting anger on Mo Xianyu's behalf was far from enough. Did he really have to slaughter the entire Mo family? To be honest, that wouldn't have been anything difficult to do. Wei Wuxian pondered this as he sauntered back to the Mo manor. As he snuck past the west courtyard with small, quick steps, he noticed the Lan disciples on top of the rooftops and wall eaves, gathering in somber discussion. He snuck back again with those small, quick steps and looked up, watching them intently. While the Lan clan of Guzu was a major part of the coalition that had come to besiege him in the past, those juniors hadn't yet been born yet, or if they had only been a couple of years old. So that event had nothing to do with them. Wei Wuxian stood there and observed, wanting to see how they planned on handling the situation. As he looked on, he suddenly felt something was amiss. Why did those black flags being flown on the rooftops and wall eaves look so familiar? The flag was called a spirit attraction flag. If it was stuck on a living person, then it would attract every dark spirit, every vengeful ghost, every fierce corpse, and all such manner of evil to attack said person. Since wearing a flag was akin to being a living target, the flag was also called a target flag. It could also be stuck on buildings, but said buildings had to have living persons inside, and the range of the target would increase to include all the people within the building. Since yin energy swirled around the area where the flags were planted like a black whirlwind, they were also known as black wind flags. Those youths were setting up the flag formation and had told others not to go near, so they had to intend to lure the walking corpses here to capture them all at once. As for why the flags looked familiar, how could they not? The creator of the spirit attraction flag was this very Yiling patriarch. It appeared that, despite how the cultivating world had demanded Wei Wuxian's demise, they nevertheless had no qualms about using his inventions. One of the disciples on the rooftops noticed him watching and chided him. "Go back! This isn't a place you should be." Though he was being ordered to shoo, it was done with good intentions, and the tone of voice employed was greatly different from those of the Mo servants. While the youth was off his guard, Wei Wuxian hopped up and plucked a flag. Greatly alarmed, that disciple jumped down the wall to chase after him. "Don't touch that! It's not for you!" Wei Wuxian hollered as he ran, looking completely like a lunatic, his hair flying loose and disheveled, arms waving and legs skipping. "Finders keepers! I want it! It's mine!" That disciple quickly caught up with him and grabbed his arm. "Give it back, or I'll hit you!" Wei Wuxian clutched the flag tightly, refusing to let go. The leader of the group that had been setting up the flag formation was alerted by the commotion and also came fluttering down from the eaves. "Jingyi, let it go. Retrieve the flag nicely. There is no need to start a dispute." "Sijui, I didn't hit him for real," Lan Jingyi complained. "Look at him. He's messing up the flag formation." During their push and pull, Wei Wuxian had swiftly finished inspecting the spirit attraction flag. The drawn patterns were correct, and none of the spells were missing either. There were no mistakes, so no mishaps would occur if the flags were used. The only issue was that the person who'd drawn the flag was not very experienced, so the flag spell could only attract any evil and walking corpses within 2.5 kilometers radius at most. But that would be enough. Lan Sijui turned to him with a smile. Mo Gonzi, it's getting late, and we're about to start catching walking corpses here soon. It is dangerous at night. You'd best hurry back to your chambers. Wei Wuxian sized up this youth. The boy was gentle in disposition, refined and elegant, noble in his bearing, with a light grin curving the corner of his lips. This was a good sprout, very worthy of encouragement, and Wei Wuxian mentally gave him a nod of approval. The child had set up the flag formation in a proper and orderly manner, and his upbringing really was quite considerable as well. Wei Wuxian wondered who among that terrifying group full of uptight stick-in-the-mud known as the Lan clan had managed to raise such a junior. Lan Sijui added, "This flag," but before he could finish, Wei Wuxian tossed the spirit attraction flag onto the ground and humphed. "What's so good about this crappy flag? I could draw way better." He then took right off. The juniors who were on the rooftop watching the show burst out laughing at his shameless declaration so riotously that they almost fell off the roof. Lan Jingyi also laughed in exasperation, then picked up the flag from the ground, dusting it off. "What a lunatic!" "Don't say that," said Lan Sijui, chiding him. "Let's go back and help now." As for Wei Wuxian, he wandered idly about for a while. It wasn't until after dark that he returned to Mo Jianyu's little courtyard. The door latch was snapped, without anyone to clean up the mess. He ignored it and picked a somewhat clean spot on the room floor before sitting down and continuing to meditate. Yet, unexpectedly, it hadn't reached the morning hours when a noisy commotion outside pulled him out of his meditative state. A clamor of footsteps mixed with wailing and screaming was rapidly approaching, and Wei Wuxian heard these cries repeated. "Break in and drag him out! Report him to the authorities! Who cares about the authorities? Just beat him to death!" He opened his eyes just as a number of servants charged in. The entire courtyard had been lit up as bright as day, and someone was shouting, "Drag that murderous lunatic to the main hall and have him pay with his life!" Wei Wuxian's first thought was, did something go wrong with those youths' flag formation? The smallest carelessness in the usage of his inventions could cause disaster, which was why he had earlier purposefully gone to verify whether the spirit attraction flags were properly drawn. Thus, when those large hands came to grab him out the door, Wei Wuxian lay there limply, allowing himself to be dragged out. It saved him the trouble anyways. He was dragged to the East Hall, where it was as lively as could be. Surprisingly, there were no fewer townspeople gathered than there had been the day before. Many of the servants and close family relations had come, some still dressed in inner robes, not having had time to coif their hair, panic painted on each of their faces. Lady Mo sat slumped in her seat as if she had only just awoken from having fainted. There were traces of tears on the sides of her cheeks, and the rims of her eyes were still wet. However, the moment Wei Wuxian was dragged in, her tears instantly transformed into a baleful glare. On the ground, there lay something that resembled the form of a human. The body was covered by a white sheet, and only its head was exposed. Lan Sijui and the other youths had bent over it, inspecting the body solemnly and whispering to each other. Their words filtered through Wei Wuxian's ear. It hadn't been one incense time since he had been discovered. Right after subduing the walking corpses, we were rushed to the east courtyard, and the dead body was laying there in the corridor. This body was Mo Xiang. Wei Wuxian swept a glance over him, then took another look in spite of himself. This corpse looked like Mo Xiang, but at the same time not. While the facial features were clearly that of this cheap little cousin, the cheeks were deeply sunken, the eyes bulging, and the skin wrinkled. It was as if he had aged 20 years compared to the previous Mo Xiang, who had been in the prime of his youth. It also almost seemed as if he had been sucked dry of his blood and flesh. He looked like a mere sack of bones dressed in an extremely thin veil of skin. If it could be said that the Mo Xiang from before was simply ugly, then his corpse now was old and ugly. Wei Wuxian was just taking a detailed look when Madame Mo suddenly came charging over. Something shining flashed in her hand. She was holding a dagger. Moving as fast as his eyes saw, Lan Zizhui knocked it out of her hand, but before he could say anything, Madame Mo was already screaming at him. "My son died a tragic death! I need to avenge him! What are you stopping me for?" Wei Wuxian once again ducked behind Lan Zizhui and shot back, "What does your son's tragic death have to do with me?" Lan Zizhui had watched Wei Wuxian make a scene during the day, then later heard plenty of exaggerated rumors about this illegitimate son from the others. He felt great pity for this mentally ill person, and couldn't help but try to speak up for the man. "Madame Mo, the state of your son's corpse is clearly the work of evil. Its blood, flesh, and spirit have all been completely sucked out. He can't be the culprit." Madame Mo's chest heaved. "What do you know? This lunatic's father is a cultivator, so he must have learned plenty of evil magic." Lan Zizhui looked back and took a glance at the seemingly half-witted Wei Wuxian. "Madam, there's no evidence, so it's still best to— The evidence is on my son's body." Madame Mo pointed at the corpse on the ground. "Take a look yourself. Ah Yun's dead body has already told you who his murderer is." Without waiting for the others to make a move, Wei Wuxian raced to pull back the sheet from head to toe. Mo Xiang's corpse had something missing. His left arm, from the shoulder down, had vanished as if it had sprouted wings. Madame Mo added, "You see that? You all heard him today. What this lunatic said, that if Ayun touched his things again, he would chop off Ayun's arm." After her hysterics had settled, she covered her face and sobbed. "My poor Ayun never touched anything of this lunatic's. Not only was he slandered, he was killed by this maniac." Maniac. It was so endearing. How many years had it been since he'd heard himself described as such? Wei Wuxian pointed at himself, but he didn't have any words to rebuke that particular statement. He didn't know, either, whether he really was mental, or if Madame Mo was the one who was ill. After all, he had boasted about slaughtering entire sects, laying waste to millions, making blood flow like rivers, and other such things when he was younger. But that was all talk most of the time. If he really could do all that, he would have terrorized the world already. Madame Mo wasn't trying to avenge her son at all. She was only looking for someone to vent her anger on. Wei Wuxian didn't want to bother with her. After a moment of thought, he reached into Mo Xiang's robes and searched, finally digging something out. When he unfolded that something, it was a spirit attraction flag. In that instant, it dawned on him, and he muttered under his breath, "Mo Xiang brought this on himself." When Lan Zizhui and the others saw the item taken out of Mo Xiang's robes, they also understood what had happened. Thinking back to the farce that had taken place during the day, it wasn't hard to deduce what had transpired. Earlier, Mo Xiang had lost considerable face due to Mo Xianyu's hysterics, filling him with hatred. He had a mind to settle scores, but Mo Xianyu was gone out frolicking, nowhere to be found. So Mo Xiang intended to wait until nightfall to teach Mo Xianyu an underhanded lesson. Yet when night came and he snuck out the door, as he passed by the west courtyard, he saw the spirit attraction flags planted atop the wall eaves. While there were strict instructions against outings at night, and that the west courtyard was forbidden, and that those black flags were not to be touched under any circumstances, Mo Xiang thought that that was just the cultivators purposefully scaring people because they were afraid of others stealing their precious spiritual weapons. He was unaware of just how dangerous and ominous the effects of the spirit-attracting flags were, and, once held, a flag could make of a bearer a living target. Mo Xian's hands had never been clean. He'd grown addicted to stealing the talismans and spiritual tools belonging to his crazy older cousin. When he saw the magical objects, he couldn't help but feel the itch to take them for himself, no matter the cost. Thus, while the owners of the flag were subduing walking corpses in the west courtyard, he secretly plucked one away. The flag formation utilized 6 spirit-attracting flags, 5 of which were set up in the west courtyard, using those youths from the Lan family as bait. However, they themselves were protected by the countless spiritual tools concealed on their person. Although Mo Xiang had only stolen 1 flag, he didn't have any protective tools with him. Go after the weakest, as they say. Naturally, the evil spirits were lured to him. If it had only been walking corpses, then it wouldn't have been such a big deal. At most, he'd have been bitten a couple times. It wouldn't have resulted in his death. There would still have been a chance to save him. Yet, it just so happened that this spirit-attracting flag had unintentionally summoned something much more terrifying than walking corpses. And it was precisely this unknown evil spirit that had killed Mo Xiang and robbed him of an arm. Wei Wuxian raised his wrist. Sure enough, a cut on his left arm had healed. It seemed the sacrificial ritual had acknowledged Mo Xiang's death as his doing. After all, the spirit attraction flag was Wei Wuxian's invention, so he hit the mark out of pure luck. Madame Mo was perfectly aware of her son's little flaws, but she would never admit Mo Xiang had caused his own death. Anxious and aggravated, she picked up a teacup and hurled it at Wei Wuxian's face. If you hadn't made such a scene and framed him in front of so many people yesterday, would he have gone out in the middle of the night? It's all your fault, you bastard! Wei Wuxian had already prepared and stepped to the side to dodge the attack. Madame Mo then screamed at Lan Zizhui. And you bunch of useless fools! What cultivators are you? What evil can you exercise? You can't even protect a child. Yan was so young! Those youths were still green and only had so much experience under their belts. They hadn't detected anything unusual in the area, which was why they'd never thought that they'd have such a furious spirit on their hands. At first, they'd been quite sorry because they felt themselves lacking, but after Madame Mo's indiscriminate tongue-lashing, they were growing upset. After all, they'd come from a distinguished clan. No one had ever dared treat them this way. The teachings of the Lan clan of Guzu were extremely strict. They forbade raising a hand against normal folk, and not even rudeness was allowed. Even though they were irritated, they had to force it down, causing dark expressions to cloud their faces. Wei Wuxian couldn't take it anymore, and he thought, after so many years, the Lan family still acts this way. What's the use of all this self-restraint unless you're looking to suffocate yourselves? Watch me. Then he spat loudly. What do you think you're yelling at? Do you really take them to be your servants? They came all this way to exercise evil for free, and now they owe you? How old was your son again? At least 17, right? A child still? How old do you have to be to understand human words? Did they not instruct us again and again yesterday not to go near the west corridor? Not to touch anything in the formation? Your son snuck out in the middle of the night to dally about, and that's my fault? Or is it his fault? Lan Jingyi and the others let out a breath, no longer looking as upset. Madame Mo was both extremely sad and resentful, and her mind was filled with nothing but thoughts of death. More specifically, it wasn't thoughts of herself dying to accompany her son, but rather thoughts of having everyone in this world die, especially the ones currently in front of her. Whenever something happened, she'd always order her husband around, so she shoved him. Call everyone in! Call everyone in here! However, her husband was in a daze. Perhaps the shock of the death of his only son was too great, but he shoved her back. Knocked down to the ground so abruptly, Madame Mo was stunned. If this had been before, Madame Mo needn't have pushed him. As long as she raised her voice a tiny bit, he'd do whatever she asked. Yet today, he dared fight back. The servants were all terrified by her expression, and a trembling Ah Ding helped her stand. Madame Mo grabbed her heart and said in a shaking voice, You get lost too." Her husband seemed not to have heard. Ah Ding shot Ah Tong a number of looks, and Ah Tong quickly dragged his master out. It was chaos within the East Hall. Seeing how the family was finally quieting down, Wei Wuxian went to inspect the corpse further. However, he had barely glanced at it before another high-pitched scream pierced through the door. The crowd inside the hall poured out and was greeted with the sight of two bodies spasming on the ground in the east courtyard. One was slumped Ah Tong, alive, and the other was collapsed on the ground, its body wrinkled and withered as if its blood and flesh had been completely sucked away. Its left arm was already gone, and there was no blood flowing from the wound. The state of this corpse was exactly the same as Mo Xiang's. Madame Mo had just shaken off Ah Ding's supportive hand, but then she saw the corpse laying on the ground, and she was stunned in place. At last exhausted of the energy to throw more fits, she fainted. Wei Wuxian happened to be standing near her, so he caught her and passed her to Ah Ding as she was running over. He then took a glance at his right hand. A cut there was gone as well. Madame Mo's husband had only just stepped out onto the threshold of the hall. He hadn't even entered the yard before he died tragically on the spot. Everything had happened within an instant. Lan Sijui, Lan Jingyi, and the others paled, but Lan Sijui was the first to compose himself. He questioned the slumped Ah Tong. "Did you see what it was?" Ah Tong was thoroughly horrified. His teeth clenched so hard that he couldn't utter a word for the moment, only shaking his head. Lan Sijui, burning with impatience, instructed his peers to bring the boy inside before he turned to Lan Jingyi. "Did you fire the signal?" "I did," Lan Jingyi replied. "But if there's no seniors nearby who can offer assistance, our people will probably take at least an hour before they can make it here. What do? We don't even know what it is right now." It was, of course, impossible for them to leave. If the clan's disciples only cared about escaping when running into evil spirits, then not only would they embarrass the clan, but they themselves would be too ashamed to go out again. The terrified folks of the Mo household could not leave with them either. The evil spirit was most likely among them, so it would have been useless even if they fled. Lan Sijui clenched his teeth. "Stay on guard until help arrives." Since the distress signal was already fired, other cultivators would soon come to their aid. In order to avoid adding to the present trouble, by all accounts, Wei Wuxian should have retreated. Best if whoever came was no one he knew. If it was someone he had crossed paths with before, or had fought with, then it would be hard to tell what would happen. With the sacrificial ritual's curse on him, he could not leave Mo Manor yet. Besides, if the summoned creature could take 2 lives within such a short span of time, then it was abnormally ferocious. If Wei Wuxian dropped everything and left, then by the time reinforcements arrived, the entire Mo estate would have its streets filled with corpses missing their left arms. And surely some of those corpses would include the familial descendants of the Lan clan of Guzu. After a moment's deliberation, Wei Wuxian said to himself, "Let's end this quickly." Those youths were fledglings. Each of them looked nervous. Despite that, they still scrupulously took their places to protect Mo Manor, and struck talismans alongside the outside of the hall. The servant Ah Tong had already been carried inside, and Lan Sijui checked his pulse with his left hand while his right massaged Madame Mo's back. He couldn't treat both at once, and was in a sorry dilemma when suddenly Ah Tong crawled up from the ground. Ah Ding exclaimed, "Ah Tong, you're awake!" Before any delight could cross her face, Ah Tong raised his left hand and seized his own neck. Seeing this, Lan Sijui targeted several of Ah Tong's acupoints with a triple tap of his hands apiece. Wei Wuxian knew that while the Lan clan appeared gentle on the surface, their arm strength was not gentle in the least. Using that method, anyone could be rendered thoroughly unable to move. However, Ah Tong appeared not to have felt a thing. His left hand gripped harder and harder, his face scrunching more and more with pain. Lan Jingyi went over to pull his left hand, but it was like trying to break off a chunk of iron, immovable. Moments later, crack! Tong's head drooped low, and only then did the hand let go, but his neck was already broken. He had actually strangled himself before the eyes of all. Seeing this, Ding's voice trembled. A ghost! There's an invisible ghost here, and it made Tong strangle himself! Her voice was shrill and sad, raising hairs on everyone's necks. They all believed her. Wei Wuxian determined it to be the exact opposite, however. It wasn't a malicious ghost. He had seen the talisman those youths had chosen, and they were the spirit-repelling type. They had plastered the entire East Hall with them, airtight. If this really were a malicious spirit, then those talismen would have immediately burned with green flames when it entered the East Hall. Things could not be as quiet as they were now. It wasn't that the group of youths were slow to react. It was that the intruder was truly ferocious in nature. The cultivation sects had a strict criteria for determining whether something was a malicious ghost. One was considered such if it killed once a month for up to 3 months consecutively. This was the criterion that Wei Wuxian himself had set up, and it was probably still in use now. Dealing with this type was his specialty, and based on what he'd seen, killing once every 7 days would make this creature a malicious ghost that caused particularly frequent mischief. However, this thing had just killed 3 times in a row, and in a short time span too. Even accomplished cultivators would have been hard-pressed to come up with a counter-strategy, never mind these novice juniors. Just as he was thinking this, the firelight flashed. A blast of sinister wind whipped by, and every lantern and every candle in the entire courtyard, including the East Hall, was extinguished. Screams erupted the minute the lights went out. The men and women pushed and shoved, falling and fleeing. Lan Jingyi shouted, "Stay where you are! Don't run! We'll arrest anyone who runs!" Those were not words spoken without reason. Wreaking havoc in the dark and taking advantage of confusion was the nature of an evil spirit. The more the people screamed and ran amok, the easier it would be to attract trouble unknowingly. It was extremely dangerous to be left alone or to lose one's head at a time like this. And yet, it could not be helped that everyone was terrified out of their wits. So how could they possibly pay attention to and heed any instructions? It didn't take long before the East Hall fell quiet, and only the sound of light breaths and faint sniffling remained. Most had probably left. In the darkness, a firelight suddenly flared. It was Lan Sijui, who had lit an illumination talisman. The flames of the illumination talisman could not be extinguished by the sinister wind that carried evil, and he used this talisman to relight the candles anew, while the rest of the youths went around to console the others. Under the light, Wei Wuxian took a nonchalant glance at his wrists. Another cut was gone. It was then that he suddenly realized the number of cuts was wrong. There had been 2 cuts on his left wrist and 2 on his right. One cut healed after Mo Xiang's death, another healed after the death of Mo Xiang's father, and then the third after the death of the servant Tong. Tallying that up, there should have been 3 healed cuts, leaving only the cut with the deepest wound and the deepest hatred. But now there was nothing on his wrists, not a single cut was left. Wei Wuxian trusted that Madame Mo was most definitely among those whom Mo Xiang wanted to seek revenge upon. The longest and deepest gash was most likely for her, yet it had surprisingly vanished. Was it Mo Xiang who had suddenly let it go and abandoned his hatred? That was impossible. His soul had been sacrificed as a price for summoning Wei Wuxian. In order for the cut to heal, Madame Mo had to die, unless... He slowly moved his gaze from his wrist to Madame Mo, who had recently aroused and was surrounded by a crowd. Her face was white as a sheet. Unless she was already dead. Wei Wuxian was sure something had already possessed Madame Mo. If that thing was not a spirit, then what could it be? Suddenly, Ah Ding cried, "Hand! Hand! Ah Tong's left arm!" Lan Sijui moved the illumination talisman over to Ah Tong's corpse. Sure enough, his left arm had also vanished. The left arm! In that flash of a second, everything was clear. The creature causing mischief and the vanishing left arms formed a connection that clicked in Wei Wuxian's mind. He suddenly snorted and busted out laughing. Lan Jingyi huffed. "That dummy! How can he laugh at a time like this?" But then he realized that, given the man was a dummy, what was the point of bothering with him in the first place? However, Wei Wuxian grabbed Lan Jingyi's sleeve and shook his head. "No, no!" Lan Jingyi irritably tried to pull his sleeve back. "No what? Not a dummy? Stop playing around. No one's got time for you." Wei Wuxian pointed at Father Mo's and Ah Tong's corpses on the ground. "That's not them." Lan Sijui stopped Lan Jingyi, who was about to blow up. He asked, "You said that's not them. What do you mean?" Wei Wuxian repeated solemnly, "This isn't Mo Xiang's father, and that's not Ah Tong either." With his face smeared in makeup, the more solemn he was, the more it felt like he really was mentally ill. However, under the haunting candlelight, his words were surprisingly hair-raising. Lan Sijui was stunned for a moment, then questioned him in spite of himself. "Why is that?" Wei Wuxian said smugly, "Because the hand. They are not left-handed. They always beat me with their right hands. I know that much at least." Lan Jingyi lost his temper and spat. "What are you so smug for? Look at that pleased face." Lan Sijui, however, had broken out in a cold sweat from the shock. Thinking back, Ah Tong had strangled himself using his left hand, and when Madame Mo's husband pushed his wife down, he had also used his left hand. But during the day, when Mo Xiang had been causing all that ruckus in the East Hall, those two had been busy trying to chase him out using their habitual right hands. Surely they couldn't both have turned into left-handers all of a sudden right before their deaths. Although the cause was presently unknown, in order to investigate what was causing the mischief, they had to start with those left arms. Having come to this conclusion, Lan Sijui sent a bewildering look at Wei Wuxian. Despite himself, he thought, for him to suddenly say something like that, really, it doesn't seem like a coincidence. Wei Wuxian only continued to laugh cheekily, knowing that the hint he had given was far too conspicuous, but that there was no other choice. Thankfully, Lan Sijui didn't dig into it, thinking, either way, since this Mo Gunzi was willing to call attention to it for me, it most likely wasn't done in ill intent. He moved his gaze from Wei Wuxian, swept it over Ah Ding, who had just fainted from weeping, and landed his eyes on Madame Mo. His eyes traveled down from her face to her hands. Her arms were hanging by her sides, mostly hidden in the sleeves, revealing only the tips of her fingers. The fingers of her right hand were snow white and slim, truly the hand of a woman who had lived in privilege, without the hardships of labor. However, the fingers of her left hand were longer and thicker than those of the right. The knuckles were curled, filled with strength. How could that be the hand of a woman? It was clearly the hand of a man. "Hold her down!" Lan Sijui shouted. The youths had already twisted Madame Mo's arm back in a hold. With a "forgive me," Lan Sijui pulled out a talisman. He was ready to slap it down when Madame Mo's left arm twisted at an impossible angle, aiming for his throat. The only way for a living human to twist their arm that way would to be if their bones were broken. The hand's movement was fast, and it would have seized his neck had it not been for Lan Jingyi tackling Lan Sijui with a loud "gah" and blocking the attack for him. There was a flash of firelight. That hand had only just grabbed Lan Jingyi's robe when the green flames flared to life at the same spot. It instantly loosened its grip. Having escaped death, Lan Xinjui was about to thank Lan Jingyi for coming to his rescue when he saw that half of Lan Jingyi's uniform had been burned to ashes, making him look incredibly unkempt. Flustered and outraged, Lan Jingyi stripped off the unburned half of his uniform as he looked up and yelled, "Why did you kick me, stupid lunatic? What, do you want me to die?" Wei Wuxian scurried away, hugging his head. "It wasn't me!" It was most certainly he who had kicked Lan Jingyi. The outer robe of the Lan family uniform was tightly embroidered with spells and incantations inside its lining to provide protection.
However, the effects would have been nullified after one use when encountering a formidable creature such as this. Under these dire circumstances, Wei Wuxian could only give Lan Jingyi a kick and make him use his body to shield Lan Xinjui's neck. Lan Jingyi was going to yell some more, but Madame Mo collapsed to the ground. The flesh and blood of her face had been drained so utterly that only a thin layer of skin pressed against her skull remained. The man's arm that did not belong to her fell off of her left shoulder, yet its fingers still moved as they willed. It was as if it was stretching, the pulsing of its veins clearly visible. That thing was the evil that had been summoned by the spirit attraction flag. Dismemberment was a standard violent way to die. It was a little more dignified than the way Wei Wuxian had died, though not by much. Unlike being crushed to ashes, the limbs of a dismembered corpse retained a part of the grudges of the deceased. One would yearn to return to its body, yearn to die a complete corpse. Thus, it would also attempt to seek out the other parts of its body. Once found, the corpse would then perhaps rest in peace and be satisfied, or perhaps wreak more havoc. If the rest of its original body wasn't found, however, a limb could only go for the second best option. What was the second best option? Seeking out the bodies of living humans to make do, just as this left arm had demonstrated. Devour the left arm of the living, take its place, and suck out all the living humans' spirit, blood, and flesh. Then abandon the body to continue searching for the next host. It would continue until all the parts of its original corpse were found. Once this arm attached itself to a body, it was an instant death for the host. Though prior to their blood and flesh being completely eaten, the human could still move normally under the arm's control, as if it was still alive. After the arm had been summoned, the first vessel it found was Mo Xiang. The second vessel was Mo Xiang's father. When Madame Mo had told her husband to get lost, he'd acted out of character and pushed her. At first, Wei Wuxian had thought that it was because the man was heartbroken because his first son's death, and that he'd also had enough of his wife's unreasonable behavior. In retrospect, that had not been the demeanor of a father who had just lost his son. That had not been a stupor of despair. It had been stillness, the stillness of death. The third vessel was Ah Tong, and the fourth was Madame Mo. The left arm took advantage of the chaos when the lights went out earlier to migrate to her body. And when Madame Mo was killed, the last cut on Wei Wuxian's wrist had also vanished with her demise. Seeing how the talismans were useless, but their clothes were not, all the Lan youths each stripped off their outer robes and threw them on the left arm, covering it and wrapping it in layers upon layers of robes like a thick white cocoon. A moment later, this ball of white cloths ignited with a whoosh, the wicked green flames blazing into the sky. Though it worked for the time being, it would not last long. Once the uniforms were completely burnt, that arm would break free from their ashes. While no one was paying attention, Wei Wuxian ran straight for the west courtyard. Over a dozen walking corpses those youths had captured were standing silently in the yard. A spell had been drawn upon the ground to seal them inside its boundary, and Wei Wuxian stepped on one of the characters, destroying the entire array. After 2 claps, the walking corpses jerked. Their white eyes opened abruptly, as they had been shocked awake by an explosion of thunder. "Wake up," Wei Wuxian said. "Time to go to work." He never needed any complicated spells or summoning incantations to control corpse puppets. The most straightforward command would suffice. The walking corpses at the very front quivered as they struggled to shuffle a few steps. Then, the moment they approached Wei Wuxian, they fell face first to the ground, like living humans, as if their legs had grown weak from terror. Not knowing whether to laugh or cry at this, Wei Wuxian clapped twice more, but much softer this time. However, these walking corpses had probably been born at the Mo estate and had died there as well. They'd never seen the world. So while they instinctively obeyed the summoner's commands, they were also terrified of the summoner for some reason, lying on the ground whimpering, too afraid to get up. The crueler the evil spirit, the easier it was for Wei Wuxian to manipulate it. These walking corpses had never gone through his training, so they could not withstand his direct control. He had no material at his disposal to immediately create a device that could ease their fear either, and nothing with which to improvise. As he watched the blazing green flames from the east courtyard gradually die down, an idea suddenly came to mind. Why go out searching to find a cruel and vicious deceased, one steeped in extreme hatred? The East Hall already had one. More than one. He darted back to the east courtyard. Lan Siju's first plan had come to an end, and so he devised another. The youths all unsheathed their long swords, planting them in the ground to form a fence of blades. The ghost arm smashed around within the enclosure. It was taking all their energy just to hold the hilts in place and prevent them from being expelled by the force. No one had the time to pay attention to who was going in and out of the hall. Wei Wuxian stepped into the East Hall and yanked up the corpses of Madame Mo and Mo Xiang, one in each hand. In a low voice, he gave the command, "Awake yet?" At the sound of his voice, the souls returned. An instant later, Madame Mo and Mo Xiang opened their white eyes and let out a shrill shriek unique to the malicious ghosts at the moment of their resurrection. Amidst the high and low shrieks, another corpse crawled to its feet in trepidation, calling out feebly with a voice that could not have been any softer. It was Madame Mo's husband. The cries were loud enough, the hatred plentiful. Wei Wuxian was incredibly pleased. "Recognize that arm out there?" He smiled. "Tear it apart," he ordered. The three members of the Mo family were like three blasts of black wind, throwing forth in an instant. That left arm had just broken a broadsword. Just as it was about to break out of the pen, three left armless, fierce corpses came looming at it. Even aside from the fear of disobeying Wei Wuxian's orders, these three carried an intense hatred for the creature that had killed them, and they unleashed all their fury upon that ghost arm. The one leading the attack was undoubtedly Madame Mo. Once reanimated, female corpses were often particularly ferocious. Her hair was flying wild, her white eyes crawling with red, and her nails had burst in length exponentially. She was foaming at the mouth, her shrill cries practically raising the roofs, completely crazed. Mo Xiang followed his mother closely, working in concert with her to both tear and bite at the left arm, while his father trailed behind them, filling in the gaps between the other two's attacks. The Lan youths who had been struggling to hang on earlier were all stunned. They had only ever heard of such fights between fierce corpses from sundry books and hearsay. This was the first time they had witnessed such a gory scene, and they gawked, unable to avert their eyes. They only had one thought in their minds. This was so exciting! The three corpses and the one arm were in the throes of battle. Suddenly, Mo Xiang shrieked as he dodged. That arm had swiped at his abdomen, and several ropes of his intestines drooped from the tear. Madame Mo snarled incessantly at the sight of this. She pulled her son behind her to shield him while she escalated her attacks, her nails slicing through the air sharply like blades made of iron and steel. However, Wei Wuxian could tell that she was slowly losing against the arm. Even three freshly dead, fierce corpses working together could not subdue this one arm. Wei Wuxian watched the battle closely. He curled his tongue slightly, holding a sharp whistle back between his lips as he hesitated to let it loose. If he whistled, he could evoke greater hatred within the controlled fierce corpses, and that would perhaps turn the tables. However, it would be difficult to ensure that no one noticed that he was the instigator. In the span of a second, that hand moved as fast as lightning, ruthless and precise as it snapped Madame Mo's neck. Seeing how the Mo family was being steadily beaten back, Wei Wuxian was just about to let loose the whistle he held under his tongue when, right then, 2 strums from a gochen sounded in the far distance. The 2 notes were skillfully played, ethereal and clear, carrying with them the tinkling bleakness of windswept pines. The collection of demonic evils that were in the middle of the brawl all froze. The youths of the Lan clan of Guzu immediately beamed as if they had been resurrected. Lan Sijui raised a hand to wipe away the blood on his face and then looked up, calling out in delight, "Han Wenjun!" The moment he heard the cry of that sobriquet and the distant Gochin, Wei Wuxian turned to leave. Another strum. This time the note was higher pitched, piercing through the sky like an austere harshness of winter's first approach. The 3 fierce corpses shrank back while covering one ear with their right hands at the same time. However, it was impossible to block out the eradication tone of the Lan clan of Guzu in such a way. They only managed to back up a few steps before there was a faint sound of cracking in their skulls. As for the left arm, after engaging in such a ferocious fight, hearing the sound of the strings now made it suddenly drop to the ground. Though its fingers still twitched, the arm was already lying limp and silent. After a short silence, the group of youths couldn't help but erupt into loud cheers, the sound filled with jubilation of having survived. They had endured the terrifying night, and now that help from the clan had finally arrived, they couldn't have cared less if they were harshly punished later for disgracing the sect with a breach of etiquette. While they waved toward the moon, Lan Sijue suddenly noticed someone missing. He tugged at Lan Jingyi. "Where is he?" Lan Jingyi was busy being happy and replied, "Who? He who?" "That Mogonzi," Lan Shizhen replied. "Huh? Why are you looking for that lunatic? Who knows? Maybe he's scared of getting beaten up by me and ran off somewhere." Lan Sijuen knew that Lan Jingyi was unmindful and straightforward, never thinking deeply on things or harboring suspicion. He thought to himself, "I'll just wait until Han Wenjun is down here. Then I'll report to him about the man and the incident." The Mo estate slumbered soundly, though whether the peace was real or fake was difficult to say. Even though there had been a bloody corpse fight in the Mo Manor's east and west courtyards, no one was getting up in the middle of the night to watch it. One had to pick and choose the right spectacle to watch, and a spectacle with such incessant screaming was best avoided. Wei Wuxian rapidly destroyed any remaining evidence of the sacrificial ritual array, and then ran out the door. Of all people who could have come, it had to be the Lan family, and of all the people to come, it just had to be Lan Wangji. This was someone with whom he had once crossed paths and fought, so he retreated in a hurry. Anxious to find a steed, as he passed by the courtyard, he noticed a spotted donkey tied next to the large millstone, chewing something in its mouth. It seemed a little surprised when it saw him come dashing over, giving him side-eye like a person would. The instant Wei Wuxian met his eyes, he was immediately moved by the disdain in this gaze. He went up to it, yanked off its rope, and started dragging it out. The spotted donkey loudly complained. Wei Wuxian cajoled as he dragged, coaxing it in every possible position to make it move. Stepping out in the lightning of dawn, they clattered onto the main road. End of Chapter 2.